The party was loud and bright, the kind my mother loved. My cousin Dana had just graduated with honors, and the whole neighborhood seemed to be crammed into Aunt Patricia's living room. Colored balloons, loud music, trays of food everywhere. Everyone was celebrating Dana like she had just conquered the world. Maybe she had. I stood near the kitchen holding a tray of drinks, trying to stay invisible. I had gotten good at that over the years. Then someone asked the question. A neighbor named Mr. Okafor, the type who always asked uncomfortable things with a big smile on his face. He looked right at me and said, "So what about this one? What's the plan for the future?" The room shifted. People turned. My mother, standing near the window in her blue dress, let out a loud laugh before I could even open my mouth. She waved her hand like she was swatting away a fly and said the words clearly, without hesitation. "That one, please. They'll never succeed at anything." Awkward laughter followed. Some people looked away. Some smiled nervously. I stood completely still, holding that tray, feeling every word land in my chest like something heavy being dropped from a great height. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I quietly set the tray down on the nearest table and walked out of the room. But as I stepped outside into the cool evening air, I whispered something to myself. Fine. Let's see. My name is Zara. I was 24 years old that night at Dana's party, living alone in a tiny apartment on the east side of the city. The rent was just manageable. The furniture was second-hand. The walls were thin enough to hear the neighbors argue every Thursday. But none of that bothered me much because the moment I got home that night, I opened my laptop and I felt something close to peace. Hidden in a folder called Personal Notes was the business I had been quietly building for 7 months. Nobody knew about it. Not my mother. Not Dana. Not any of the relatives who laughed in that living room. Just me and the screen and the quiet hum of the city outside my window. The idea was simple, but I believed in it deeply. An online platform that connected small local food vendors with customers in their area. Not a restaurant app. Something more personal, more community-driven. I had already written the business plan, sketched the design, and started learning basic coding through free online tutorials. Every night after my day job as an administrative assistant, I would come home and work on it for 2 to 3 hours. My mother's voice echoed in my head as I stared at the screen that night. They'll never succeed at anything. Type faster. Then a new email notification blinked at the top of my screen. The email was from something called the Brightfield Startup Accelerator. I had applied 3 months earlier and completely forgotten about it. I almost deleted it thinking it was spam. But I read it twice, then a third time. They were inviting me to pitch my idea to a panel of investors. Real investors. The event was in 6 weeks. My hands were shaking slightly as I closed the laptop. I sat in the dark for a moment, just breathing. This was real. This was actually happening. I wanted to call someone, share the news, but there was nobody to call. My closest friend, Amara, was 3 cities away. My mother would laugh. My cousin Dana would find a way to make it about her own success. So I just sat there, quietly excited, letting the feeling settle in my chest like warm tea. Then I checked the date of the pitch event. My stomach dropped. It was the same weekend as my grandmother's 70th birthday celebration. A massive family gathering my mother had been planning for 2 months. Attendance was not optional in our family. It was a requirement. Missing it would mean weeks of silence, cold looks, and sharp comments at every future event. When I mentioned carefully to my mother that I might have a work commitment that weekend, she didn't even look up from her phone. "Your little hobbies won't feed you," she said flatly. "Be there." Chose the pitch. I told myself it was the smart decision. I told myself that my grandmother would understand, that I would celebrate with her privately, that this opportunity might never come again. But even as I took the 3-hour bus ride to the Brightfield event, I felt the weight of the choice sitting on my shoulders like a bag full of stones. The venue was a modern co-working space downtown. Glass walls, exposed ceilings, people in polished clothes holding coffee cups and speaking with confidence. I wore my best blazer and the only pair of formal shoes I owned. I practiced my pitch in the bus bathroom 3 times. When it was my turn, I stood in front of the panel and spoke. I laid out the idea clearly. The problem, the solution, the market, the vision. Thought I did well. I thought I sounded prepared. Then one of the investors, a tall man with glasses named Mr. Femi, leaned forward and began tearing my presentation apart piece by piece. The pricing model was weak. The technology plan was too vague. My user acquisition strategy, he said bluntly, was not serious. He spoke loudly enough for the whole room to hear. Said thank you. I walked off the stage. I grabbed my bag and headed for the exit, telling myself I would cry on the bus where nobody could see me. But before I reached the door, I heard quick footsteps behind me. The man who followed me into the hallway was not someone I had noticed during the pitch session. He was older, maybe late 50s, with a calm face and a worn leather notebook tucked under his arm. He introduced himself as Mr. Adeyemi. "Your idea has something real in it," he said quietly. "But you presented it like you were apologizing for it." I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. "I'm not going to fund you today," he continued. "But I'd like to work with you. Help you sharpen the concept, strengthen the pitch, build your confidence. It won't cost you anything. Just your time and your honesty." I stared at him for a moment. He didn't look like someone who needed to trick a 24-year-old with a half-built app. I asked him why he would bother. He smiled and said, "Because I've seen ideas like yours die because the person behind them gave up too early. I'd rather not watch that happen again." We exchanged contact details right there in the hallway. On the bus ride home, I called my mother, feeling a small flicker of hope. I told her what happened. Not everything, just that I had found a mentor who believed in my idea. She laughed. "Mentoring is just a polite way of saying you failed," she said. I pressed my lips together and said goodnight. But something had changed inside me. Her words didn't break me this time. They lit a fire. The months that followed were the hardest of my life. Mr. Adeyemi and I met every 2 weeks, either at a small cafe near his office or over video call. He pushed me hard. He made me rewrite my business plan 4 times. He challenged every number I presented and made me defend every decision out loud until I could do it without hesitating. Meanwhile, I was still working my day job, still paying rent, still surviving on budget meals and borrowed time. I picked up a second job on weekends doing data entry for a logistics company. Most nights I slept 5 hours or less. My mother called occasionally to update me on family news. Dana had been promoted. Dana had bought a new car. Dana was dating a doctor. She never asked how I was doing without turning the conversation back to Dana within 60 seconds. And then there was my cousin Kofi. I had mentioned my business idea to Kofi just once, almost a year earlier, during a family dinner. Just a brief description. I thought nothing of it. One afternoon, while scrolling through a local business forum online, I saw a pitch post for something called Neighbor Eats, a platform connecting local food vendors with community customers. The description read almost exactly like my original business plan. The name posting it was Kofi. I confronted Kofi the next evening. I drove to his apartment, knocked on his door, and stood in his living room with my phone showing him the forum post. He barely blinked. "Ideas aren't owned, Zara," he said calmly, dropping onto his couch. "You hadn't done anything with it. I just moved faster." I told him that wasn't the point. I told him I had 7 months of development behind my version, that I had documentation, that this wasn't something he could just claim. He shrugged and offered me a drink. Left. When I called my mother that night, still shaking, I made a mistake. I told her what had happened. I expected her to be on my side. She was his aunt. She had known us both our whole lives. Surely she would understand. Instead she said, "Well, Kofi is smart. He sees opportunities. That's what successful people do." I sat on my apartment floor after hanging up, the phone face down beside me. I had faced a rejected pitch, a stolen idea, a cousin with no guilt, and a mother who had just called that theft smart. The next morning I called Mr. Adeyemi and told him everything. He listened quietly. Then he said, "Your version is still better, Zara. I've seen his. I've seen yours. It's not even close. The question is what you do next. We didn't waste time feeling sorry. Mr. Adeyemi sat across from me at our usual cafe the following week with a completely blank notebook page between us. Kofi gave us a gift, he said. I looked at him like he had lost his mind. He tapped the page. He showed us the weaknesses in the original model, the things that made it easy to copy. We fix those, we go deeper, we build something he can't replicate even if he tries. So we pivoted. Instead of just connecting vendors and customers, we redesigned the platform to include vendor training resources, community rating systems built around trust rather than just speed, and a subscription model for regular customers that created loyalty. It was more complex, more meaningful, and significantly harder to clone without the original framework behind it. I rebuilt the entire technical plan with help from an online developer I found through Mr. Adeyemi's network. She worked remotely and charged a rate I could just barely afford. Meanwhile, Kofi's version stalled publicly. His forum post attracted some early interest but no serious backing. The idea without the depth was just a surface. 3 months after we pivoted, something shifted. 2 investors who had sat in the room the day Mr. Femi tore my pitch apart reached out through the accelerator's contact system. They wanted to meet again. They had apparently been watching quietly. The meeting was in a glass-walled office on the 14th floor of a building downtown. I took the elevator up wearing the same blazer from the first pitch, freshly dry-cleaned. Mr. Adeyemi had offered to come with me for moral support, but I told him I needed to do this one alone. He nodded and said, "Good. You're ready." The investor's name was Ms. Bello. She was sharp, fast-talking, and asked questions that felt designed to catch me off balance. But I had rehearsed for this. Every question Mr. Adeyemi had ever thrown at me in that cafe came back to me now, and I answered each one clearly and without flinching. At the end of the meeting, Ms. Bello placed a folder on the table and pushed it toward me. It was a funding offer. Real money. Enough to build the platform properly, hire a small team, and run for 18 months without needing revenue to survive. The condition was that I go full-time. No day job. No safety net. Complete commitment. I went home and sat with the folder for 2 days. My mother called on the second evening. Somehow she had heard through a relative that I was considering leaving my job. She didn't know the details, but she had strong opinions anyway. "You're going to throw away a stable job for a dream," she said. "You'll be begging within a year." I signed the contract the next morning. The first 4 months after launching were brutal. The platform was live but growing slowly. We had a small team of 3 people including me, all working from my apartment and a shared co-working desk we split the cost on. The developer, whose name was Tola, was brilliant but overworked. Our third team member, a young guy named Bayo who handled outreach, was enthusiastic but inexperienced. Money was managed carefully, almost painfully. I stopped eating out entirely. I tracked every expense in a spreadsheet I checked every morning like it was a medical report. There were 3 specific nights where I sat alone after everyone had gone home and genuinely wondered if my mother had been right all along. Not the loud dramatic version of doubt. Just the quiet, exhausting kind that settles in when you're tired and the numbers aren't moving the way you hoped. I called Mr. Adeyemi during one of those nights. He didn't give me a speech. He just said, "Is the product good?" Said yes. "Then keep going," he said. That's it. Kept going. And then, on a Tuesday morning in early spring, Bayo came running into the apartment holding his phone with both hands, nearly tripping over a chair. A food blogger with over 200,000 followers had discovered our platform and written a glowing post about it overnight. By noon we had 3,000 new signups. Everything changed after that post. Not all at once, not like a movie, but steadily like water filling a room. Within 2 weeks we had crossed 10,000 active users. Vendors who had been hesitant started signing up daily. The community rating system that we had built into the pivot was getting strong engagement, with customers leaving detailed reviews that were building real trust between buyers and sellers. It was working exactly the way we had designed it to work. Tola hired a part-time assistant to help with the technical load. Bayo's outreach efforts started producing results as local media began picking up the story of a young woman building a community food platform from her apartment. Ms. Bello called to congratulate us. Then 2 other investors called. Then a local business magazine requested a brief profile. In the middle of all this, I found out through a mutual contact that Kofi's version of the idea, Neighbor Eats, had officially shut down. He had run out of funding and interest at the same time. The platform had never solved the trust problem that ours had been specifically built around. I felt no joy reading that. Just a quiet, steady sense of clarity. The family still had no idea. My mother was still telling relatives that I had left a good job to chase something foolish. As far as she knew, I was barely surviving. I let her believe it. Over the next year, the company grew in a way that sometimes surprised even me. We expanded into 4 new cities. Our vendor base grew to over 300 active sellers. The subscription model brought in consistent monthly revenue. We hired 2 more full-time team members and moved out of my apartment into a small but real office space with a lease and everything. I gave the company a name during those early days that had stayed. Rootable. The idea behind the name was simple. Every community has roots. We were just helping people find them through food. I bought myself one small luxury during this period. Proper desk chair. The old one had been leaving marks on my back for 2 years. My mother, meanwhile, continued her life in the family neighborhood without any knowledge of what was happening. I visited on holidays and said little. She talked about Dana. She talked about Kofi's new job in sales. She mentioned once, almost gently, that she hoped I was managing okay financially. I said I was fine. She nodded, looking only halfway convinced. Then one afternoon she called with an unusual request. Her voice was softer than normal. She was wondering, she said, whether I could lend her a modest amount of money to help a younger relative get a small business started. What kind of business? Yes. She described it. I sat quietly for a moment. It was almost identical to Rootable's original concept. I told my mother I would think about it. I sat with that phone call for several days. Not because I was angry, though part of me felt something complicated, but because there was something almost impossible about the moment. She was asking me, the one she had publicly declared would never succeed, to fund an idea that was essentially the one she had mocked me for years earlier. She had no idea. That was the part that sat heaviest. She wasn't being cruel this time. She genuinely had no idea that the idea she was describing was exactly what I had already built, quietly, while she was telling everyone I was struggling. I didn't fund the relative's idea. I told her I wasn't in a position to help with that kind of thing, which was only partly untrue. I wasn't in a position to explain myself yet. Not then. 3 weeks later, I received an email that moved things into a completely different phase. The Westfield Entrepreneurship Conference, one of the largest business events in the region, was inviting me to deliver the keynote speech at their annual gathering. The conference drew hundreds of attendees from across industries. It was held every year in a large auditorium. The location listed in the email made me go still. It was being hosted this year in my hometown, the same city where my mother lived. The same city where I had stood holding a drinks tray while she told a room full of relatives I would never amount to anything. I said yes to the conference immediately. Over the following weeks, my name began appearing in places it had never been before. A regional business magazine ran a profile on Rootable and my journey. A startup newsletter featured me in their monthly spotlight. Online, the story of a young woman who built a community food platform from almost nothing was starting to get genuine attention. One afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize at first. Then I realized it was a cousin on my mother's side. The message said only, "Is this article about you?" She had attached a link to the magazine profile. I replied, "Yes." Then I turned my phone over and went back to preparing my speech. 2 days later, my mother called me. Her tone was lighter than usual. She mentioned the article without connecting it to me directly. She said, "There's a story going around about some young woman with a food app. People in the neighborhood are talking about it. Very inspiring." I said, "Yes, I heard about it." She asked nothing more. I had been waiting for the right moment to tell her. But I wanted her to see it in person. I wanted the words to be in a room with hundreds of people around her, the same way her words had been in a room full of people around me years earlier. The conference organizers asked if I wanted family seats reserved. Said yes. 2 seats. I called my mother the week before the conference. I kept my voice completely normal. I told her I had received an invitation to attend a local entrepreneurship event and I thought she might enjoy it. I said it was a good chance to get out of the house, that it was a well-organized event with interesting speakers. She asked what kind of event it was. I said it was a business conference. Nothing dramatic. Just something happening in the city. She agreed to come, the way she agreed to most things I suggested, with mild curiosity and low expectations. She asked if Dana could come too. I said there was only 1 extra seat. She didn't push further. I arranged for a family friend, a kind older woman named Auntie Vera, to drive my mother to the venue and sit with her. Auntie Vera knew the full story. I had told her everything several months earlier, swearing her to silence. She had cried on the phone and then said, "Zara, I will be in that front row." Meanwhile, word had quietly spread through certain family circles that something significant was happening at the Westfield conference. People were talking about a young entrepreneur from the area being featured. Relatives who paid attention to local business news had started whispering. My cousin Kofi had apparently heard the company name Rootable mentioned. I heard from Auntie Vera that he had gone very quiet. 4 days before the conference, Kofi showed up at my office. He had found the address somehow. He stood in the small reception area looking uncomfortable, wearing a collared shirt like he had dressed up slightly for the visit. Bayo came to get me with an expression that said he wasn't sure what was happening. I brought Kofi into the small meeting room and closed the door. For a while he just looked around at the space. The Rootable logo on the wall. The framed press mentions. The whiteboard covered in growth targets. Then he sat down and said, "I heard about the conference." I said nothing. He rubbed the back of his neck. I know I was wrong about the idea. About what I did. Waited. "I'm just asking," he said quietly, "that you don't make it into a public thing." About me. At the conference. I looked at him for a long moment. He looked genuinely worried. Not the confident cousin who had shrugged in his apartment and offered me a drink while admitting he stole my idea. I told him calmly that I wasn't building my speech around him. He looked slightly relieved. I added, "The truth has a way of making itself known regardless. I can't control what people understand when they hear my story." He nodded slowly and left. He knew. He had connected every dot. And he would have to sit with that. The night before the conference, I sat alone in my office after everyone had gone home. I had the speech printed in front of me, though I barely needed to read it. I had practiced it enough times that the words felt like breathing. But I read through it one more time anyway, slowly, making sure every sentence did what I needed it to do. I had made a deliberate choice about how to tell the story. I was not going to name my mother. I was not going to point at her in the audience. I was not going to use the stage as a weapon. That was never what this was about. But I was going to tell the truth. I was going to describe that party, that room, that tray of drinks, those words exactly as they had happened. Because those words were part of my story, and pretending they weren't would make the whole speech dishonest. I thought about the version of myself who had walked out of Aunt Patricia's house that night and whispered into the cool air. That girl had been 24 and humiliated and quietly furious. She had gone home and opened a laptop and started building something in the dark. I wanted every person in that auditorium who had ever been told they wouldn't make it to recognize themselves in that girl. I closed the printed speech, turned off the office light, and went home to sleep. Tomorrow was going to be a significant day. The auditorium held close to 400 people. I arrived 2 hours early with Bayo and Tola, who had both insisted on being there. We checked the presentation slides, tested the microphone, and spoke briefly with the conference organizers. Everything was in order. The event had a professional energy that felt different from that first accelerator pitch years ago. This was not a room of people waiting to see if I would fail. I found a quiet corner backstage and spent 15 minutes just breathing slowly. Then the doors opened and the audience began filling in. Through a small gap in the stage curtain, I watched people settle into their seats. Business owners, students, community leaders, journalists with notebooks. The room filled steadily with the soft noise of conversations and chairs shifting. Then I saw my mother. She walked in with Auntie Vera, wearing a neat blouse and the small pearl earrings she saved for important occasions. She looked relaxed, curious, glancing around the auditorium with the mild interest of someone who had come to see what the fuss was about. She found her seat in the 4th row. She had no idea. I let the curtain fall back into place and stepped away from the gap. The conference host, a well-dressed woman named Ms. Ease, took the stage and opened the event. She spoke about entrepreneurship, about community, about resilience. Then I heard my name. The applause started before I reached the center of the stage. I walked out slowly, deliberately, letting myself feel the weight of the moment without rushing through it. The giant screen behind me lit up with the Rootable logo, then a timeline of the company's growth. Numbers, cities, users, press mentions, each one appearing quietly while the audience absorbed them. I stood at the microphone and let the applause settle. Then I looked out at the room. I found my mother in the 4th row almost immediately. She had gone completely still. Her hands, which had been loosely folded in her lap, were now pressed flat against her knees. Auntie Vera sat beside her with a calm, knowing expression. My mother's eyes moved from me to the screen and back again. I could see the calculation happening in real time, the pieces connecting, the picture forming. Her mouth opened slightly. I smiled at the audience the way Mr. Adeyemi had once described, not with apology, but with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned every second of being in that room. "Thank you," I said into the microphone. "I want to start by telling you about a party." The room settled into silence. "I was 24 years old," I continued. "I was holding a tray of drinks. And someone I loved very much told a room full of people that I would never succeed at anything." Nobody moved. I told the story straight. The party. The tray of drinks. Laughter. Walking out into the cool air and whispering to myself. Going home to a tiny apartment and opening a laptop and working through the night on something nobody knew about. I told them about the rejection at the pitch event. About walking toward the exit with my bag on my shoulder, thinking it was over. About the quiet man with the worn notebook who followed me into the hallway and said, "Your idea has something real in it." I told them about the late nights, the second job, the rewritten business plans, the stolen idea, the pivot, the slow growth, and the Tuesday morning when a blogger's post changed everything. I did not say my mother's name. I did not gesture toward her seat. I did not pause for effect at the moments that involved her. But I watched the audience as I spoke. And about halfway through the story, I saw heads turning. People had heard enough to recognize the shape of it. The family gathering. The dismissive comment. The room full of relatives. Several people in the audience must have been told, or guessed, or noticed the woman in the 4th row who had gone very quiet. Slowly, gently, the way light crosses a room, people began to glance in my mother's direction. She sat perfectly still, her hands flat on her knees, her face unreadable. I did not slow down to let the room dwell on her. I moved forward in the speech deliberately, because this was not about humiliating her. The moment those eyes turned toward her, I felt something protective rise up in me unexpectedly. She was my mother. Whatever had happened between us, she was sitting in that room and she was human and she did not deserve to be made an exhibit. So I raised my voice slightly and said, "I am not here to talk about who didn't believe in me. I am here to tell you what I did with that disbelief." The audience turned back to me. "Pain," I said, "is information. Tells you something is wrong, yes. But it also tells you what direction you're facing." Every time someone said I couldn't do it, I felt exactly which direction my dream was pointing. And I walked that way. The applause started slowly and then rose. I talked about resilience not as a gift some people were born with, but as a daily decision. A choice to get up and open the laptop again. Choice to call the mentor back. A choice to sign the contract when the easier path was to stay safe. When I finished, the room was on its feet. I stood at the microphone and let it wash over me, not with pride exactly, but with something quieter and more lasting. I had done it. After the applause settled, I saw my mother stand up from her seat and begin moving toward the stage. She found me near the back of the stage, in the space behind the curtain where the noise of the audience was muffled. Auntie Vera had stayed in her seat, wisely giving us the privacy the moment needed. My mother looked smaller than I was used to seeing her. Not physically. Something in the way she was standing, arms slightly inward, chin lower than usual. For a moment she didn't speak. Then she said, "That was about me." "It wasn't a question." I said. "Some of it was." She looked down at her hands. "The party. Dana's graduation party." She pressed her lips together. "I said that in front of everyone." "Yes," I said. She exhaled slowly. "Zara. I didn't think." She stopped. Tried again. "I never believed that you would." She stopped again. Waited. "I'm sorry," she finally said. The words came out plainly without performance. "I am genuinely sorry. I said things I had no right to say. I compared you constantly and I dismissed you and I." Her voice caught slightly. "I didn't believe in you. And I should have." She looked up at me then. For the first time in my entire life, I saw something in my mother's face that I had never seen directed at me. She looked ashamed. Not embarrassed. Not defensive. Genuinely ashamed. I nodded slowly. "Thank you for saying that," I told her. She was waiting for me to say something more. I could feel it. The way the silence sat between us, open, as if there was space for me to fill it with forgiveness and tears and a long embrace. I did not do that. I accepted the apology with full sincerity. I believe she meant it. I could see in her face that something had genuinely cracked open in her today, something that had been sealed shut for a long time. But I also told her the truth. "Mum," I said gently, "I love you. But I stopped needing your approval a long time ago." She blinked. "Not to hurt you," I continued, "but because I had to. If I had kept waiting for you to believe in me, I would still be waiting. I had to learn to believe in myself first, without your permission." She was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said softly. "Our relationship is real," I told her. "I want you in my life. But it has to be one where I am not shrinking myself to feel worthy of it." She nodded, slowly absorbing each word. The power between us had always run in one direction. Today it had shifted, not violently, not out of revenge, but out of simple truth. I was no longer the girl holding the drinks tray. And she was beginning, perhaps for the first time, to truly see who I had become. I had something else to tell her. Her expression shifted with curiosity as I spoke. I told her about the mentorship program. Rootable had quietly been building a second initiative alongside the platform itself. We were launching a program called First Root, designed for young entrepreneurs aged 18 to 26 who had great ideas but no resources, no network, and no one in their corner. The program would provide 3 months of structured mentorship, access to a small seed fund, and a direct connection to investors who had agreed to review pitches from participants. Mr. Adeyemi was going to lead the mentorship team. I told my mother all of this standing backstage, watching her face change as she listened. "Every person who comes through that program," I said, "will hear one lesson before anything else. Before the business planning, before the funding strategy, before the pitch training." She waited. "They'll be told, no one else gets to decide your limit. Not the investor who tears your idea apart. Not the cousin who steals it. Not the parent who laughs." Pause. "Nobody." My mother was very still. Then she said quietly, the words I said at that party. "Yes," I said. Her voice was almost a whisper. "They're going to help thousands of people." I hadn't thought of it quite that way until she said it. But it was true. The pain of that moment, the humiliation, the cold air outside Aunt Patricia's house, the whispered "fine, let's see." All of it had a reach now that extended far beyond the two of us. She put her hand over her mouth briefly. Then she straightened up and nodded. Years have passed since that conference. Rootable now operates in 11 cities. The First Root Mentorship Program has supported over 400 young entrepreneurs in its first 3 years alone. Several of them have gone on to build companies that employ real people, serve real communities, and create real change. Mr. Adeyemi still leads the mentorship sessions, though he has a team around him now. Every time I visit a session and watch a nervous 20-something defend their idea in front of a small panel, I feel something that I don't have a precise word for. Gratitude, maybe. Or recognition. My relationship with my mother is honest now. She came to the First Root launch event and sat in the front row. She has never again compared me to Dana, not once. We talk on the phone every Sunday. The conversations are different from what they used to be. There is more listening in them. More space. Kofi moved to another city and is working in something unrelated to technology. We don't speak often. When we do, there is a careful politeness between us that I think is the best we can manage. The last time I sat with my mother, we were in Aunt Patricia's garden, the same house where the graduation party had been all those years ago. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, almost to herself, "I'm proud of you, Zara." Smiled. Not because I had finally received the approval I once desperately wanted, but because I had stopped needing it long before she offered it. That is the real thing I built, before the platform, before the funding, before any of it. The quiet, unshakable belief that I was worth betting on, even when I was the only one placing the bet. Fine. See. Had seen.